Oh, and then also really quickly, can everyone just make sure that they're muted? Great. Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's session of the Berkeley Forum. My name is Aparna Iyer. I'm currently the president, and we're incredibly excited to welcome you to this event with Seung Min Kim, White House Correspondent for The Washington Post. Before we get started, a few quick reminders for our audience. We encourage you to fill out the attendance form at tinyurl.com/seungminattendance and to submit questions for our moderator to read aloud at tinyurl.com/seungminquestions. And before we begin, the Berkeley Forum would like to take the time to acknowledge that our events and UC Berkeley sit on the territory of the Ohlone people. It's important to us to recognize this as we benefit from the continued occupation of this land, and because the Muwekma Ohlone people are still alive and present in Berkeley and the Bay Area today. For more Native education resources on campus, we encourage you to look to the Centers for Educational Justice and Community Engagement. Now, I'd like to invite up our event manager for the evening, Antu Liu, to introduce the speaker.
Good evening, everyone. So Seung Min Kim is a White House reporter for the Washington Post, covering the Biden and previously the Trump administrations through the lens of Capitol Hill and the White House relationship with Congress. She specifically focuses on how the administration interacts with the press and Congress. She is also a political analyst for CNN. Before joining the Washington Post in 2018, Seung Min spent more than 8 years at Politico, primarily covering the Senate and immigration policy. Seung Min is a past president of the DC chapter of Asian American Journalists Association and a current board member of the Washington Press Club Foundation. Without further ado, I would like to welcome her up to the virtual stage.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. And thank you to all for a lovely introduction, and also to the Berkeley Forum for having me among your list of very prestigious, esteemed speakers. I'm really happy to be here tonight. So I just wanted to share, and obviously would love to open this up to further questions and answers and a discussion about journalism, about covering different administrations in Washington, kind of what it's like in Washington right now, and how we've all had to adjust amid the pandemic. But I just wanted to start off by talking about just kind of the personal adjustments that I had to make as a reporter, first covering, Donald Trump, the most unorthodox of presidents, and now kind of shifting to a more traditional, more quote unquote normal president with President Biden, who still nonetheless is providing us a steady stream of news, particularly for those of us who are really focused on his interactions with Congress and focused on policy. I tend to be a little bit of a policy nerd. I think some of the best stories come when you're kind of delving into the politics behind policy making and who is doing what and who is pushing what and why. So my kind of adjustment to Trump came kind of immediately, almost immediately after he was sworn in. I did not cover his presidential campaign in 2016. Back at that time, I was still covering Congress, primarily the Senate for Politico. So in terms of my personal coverage during 2016, I was primarily focused on covering the battle for Senate control, a lot of the marquee Senate races in Nevada, Indiana that year, and in other states. So I was, frankly, as surprised as most of the country and most of the journalism industry was when Trump won the presidency. And obviously, I had, obviously did not have kind of the firsthand experiences in covering him as a reporter and what that meant, and kind of how you deal with a president, or how you deal with a leader who is unusual, has a very loose relationship with the facts, and really made kind of his antipathy and his antagonizing of the press as, frankly, a big part of his political identity. I mean, I always like to remind people that it is healthy for White House press corps and and political reporters writ large to have a healthy adversarial relationship with any administration. And I think no president really loves their press coverage or appreciates their press coverage, but it was really taken to a new level with President Trump. And that was something that I didn't really realize, until I really got into covering, until his administration took control in Washington. And you just saw how everyone had to adjust to this new speed, new kind of way that business was being done, or in other cases, not being done in Washington. And the example that I give in terms of just how crazy it was for those of us covering the Trump administration, whether directly as White House correspondents or as I was at the time as a congressional correspondent, kind of covering how the Congress was adjusting to this new administration, is this example that I give on, I believe it was perhaps the first full weekend of his presidency. So it was in late January. And I had just spent this was a Monday night. I had just spent all weekend, from early in the morning Saturday to late at Sunday, working on coverage of the president's first travel ban, the one that was so poorly written that it could basically block green card holders who were kind of mid-flight from these targeted countries who are on an airplane. And remember just the mass havoc that it caused at airports and the lawsuit and the legal challenges that began immediately. And I was working all day Saturday, Sunday, Monday on that. And that Monday night, I was trying to get a little bit of a break because we knew that the president would pick his Supreme Court nominee the next day, and me covering the Senate and having just a personal kind of interest in covering nominations fights and the Supreme Court and whatnot, knew that my life would just kind of be taken over by that news story. So on that Monday night, I was walking home. I had worked all day on Capitol Hill, had actually stopped by the grocery store, which was like a 5-minute walk from my place at the time. And I bought 2 bags of groceries. It was around 9 o'clock at night ish, and I had 2 bags, so I obviously needed like 2 hands to carry both bags home for the short walk. And I checked my phone, no news. I get home 5 minutes later, finally I'm able to check my phone, and the president had fired Sally Yates, who was the acting attorney general, just so very quickly, because she had refused to defend his very legally dubious travel ban in court as she had been instructed to do. And that was kind of the first sign that we were going to have to be on our toes constantly. I'm sure you guys are all, intelligent consumers of news, and you really kind of, anything could be upended. If you're a reporter covering this, your day was just a lot of times just at the whims of his Twitter account. I would wake up in the morning and he would basically set to his Twitter account, and he would be making major policy pronouncements that really could change the course of your day. It's not just kind of his musings or criticisms of Republicans or whatnot that he would be saying, but he would actually take action on something that clearly wasn't thought out or vetted or previewed to us in advance or aides in advance. And that would just really kind of upend our day. I mean, there's several times where we would have to follow up with White House staff on a tweet that he sends before 7 a.m. saying, like, can you explain this? What happened? And they would be like, we're trying to find out too, and know what's going on. So that over the last 4 years, reporters, and frankly, everyone, reporters, people who live in this town and who work in the political business, lawmakers, aides, people who, federal government workers who are dependent on, the president of the United States making policy, and setting policy, it was just kind of this pace of news that we were that we really had to adjust to, and know that this isn't obviously a traditional president. He doesn't go through, for example, a standard rulemaking process or interagency reviews like normal presidents do. He doesn't necessarily always do the proper congressional notifications. A huge part of my job was, figuring out who President Trump's phone buddies were, that he would just call on a whim to ask them about, ask lawmakers for advice, or just kind of asking them, like, what are you hearing on the Hill? How am I doing? He would, like, one of my favorite examples of just how President Trump kind of communicated to members of Congress who then would talk about their conversations to me is that, one senator talked about how he was doing like a Sunday show interview on, either Meet the Press or Face the Nation, or one of the 5 Sunday shows. And then he would get off the set, look at his phone, and he had a missed call from the White House because President Trump had been watching him on TV and called him to either provide him feedback or say something like, "Great job, thanks for defending me on air." And this was a president that just communicated through really different mediums, such as, Twitter obviously being one of them before that was taken away in the aftermath of the January 6th insurrection, and obviously also through cable TV as well. And that's how lawmakers communicated to him. And also that's kind of how we all just kind of worked and just tried to kind of report on the day to day. So all that is to say that it is significantly different now. I joke that instead of waking up to Trump's tweets and retweets, I now wake up to White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain's tweets and retweets, because he is a prolific user of Twitter as well. But the Biden White House and the Biden administration has really tried to return to a level of kind of, normalcy, competence, and just kind of not engaging in kind of just the cable news TV, fight of the day, and try to be laser focused on what, on kind of their main agenda, not get sucked up into these Twitter battles or kind of, current events or even pop culture commentary that, Trump himself loved, weighing in on at any given moment of the day. So that's certainly been an adjustment. And just kind of what I've been kind of doing is just, kind of warming up these muscles that had kind of gone dormant in terms of covering the government, whether it's the White House or, or Congress, that was under, kind of the reporting skills that I honed under the Obama administration, just kind of try to cover the Biden administration that way, because obviously there's a lot of similarities there. So I think this is also a good time to kind of briefly talk about what my beat is at the Post and kind of what I focus on, because it is an unusual kind of beat or a coverage area that I do have. I am, technically a White House reporter. I am one of 8 White House reporters at the Washington Post. We have one of the biggest, and I would say the best White House reporting team in Washington, in both under the Trump administration and under the Biden administration. And within our team, a lot of us have kind of special niche expertise or coverage areas. So, but for me, my focus has been covering first the Trump White House relationship with Capitol Hill, which obviously a lot of that didn't exist, and also now the Biden administration and President Biden's relationship with Capitol Hill. So I work on a lot of stories. For example, I write about the kind of the classic relationship stories. So I wrote a lot about, for example, President Trump and Mitch McConnell under the Trump presidency, because that relationship really fascinated me, and it was really key to understand how things got done in Washington under the Trump era. And just as a human interest, it was really kind of it was really interesting for me as a reporter, and especially someone who has covered the Senate for a long time and covered Mitch McConnell for a long time, just how two men with just completely diametrically opposed personalities and governing styles it kind of learned to work hand in hand until obviously in the aftermath of the insurrection, that entire relationship fell apart. So a lot of my coverage areas are stories like that. And also just how just any sort of story that kind of has Biden or has the White House and Congress as equal players. So whether that's, a nominations fight or a major legislative fight being pushed by the White House, so COVID relief and kind of the Biden administration's outreach to Republican senators was a big focal point of mine for the last couple of weeks. And just by frankly using, congressional sources to figure out what a White House is up to. This might get too much granular in the weeds of journalism and what being a reporter exactly for a White House, particularly for a White House, entails, but almost any good White House reporter will tell you that one of the best ways of covering any White House, any administration, is talk to the people who are talking to the White House. So talk to lawmakers, talk to advocacy groups, talk to allies on the outside to kind of really figure out, plans that the White House is up to, internal deliberations, internal politics that may have an outcome on policy or the administration's agenda. And then kind of work your way in and then talk to the principals in the building. And I found that to be a huge part of, my reporting, because I use primarily congressional sources to figure out what, either White House, whether it's the Trump White House or what the Biden White House is up to. And that's been a really fun part of my job, and just kind of really working those muscles and kind of building upon my experience covering Capitol Hill and my kind of background and my love, frankly, for Congress in that way. So, but that also means that I get to do a lot of the traditional White House reporter jobs, including flying on Air Force One for domestic and foreign travel, being in the briefing room with the press secretary when she takes questions, obviously participating in press conferences with the President of the United States, which, for any president is always kind of a, frankly, a nerve-wracking experience, but obviously, been a real big privilege to be in the front lines and to get this opportunity to report, whether it's from the hallways of Capitol Hill or from a briefing room seat at the White House, or for me, being at the DMZ, just being steps from the North Korean border, which has also happened, which was a little freaky. But it's been a really great privilege and an interesting ride to cover politics and Washington for the last decade. And now I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much for that incredible address. I'd now like to invite up our moderator for the evening, Casey Lay, just to continue the conversation.
Once again, thank you so much for that great introduction to our talk. Now, we're very excited to have you join us. And before I jump into my questions, I'd just like to remind everyone in the audience that we do have a question form pinned in the comments, and we'll be taking a few of these at the end. So I want to begin by asking you a bit about your career in journalism. Now, you mainly worked at regional newspapers like the Des Moines Register before moving to DC to work for Politico. What motivated your transition to covering national politics?
So I had always been interested in covering politics, or more accurately, government. I'm not quite sure I ever wanted to be kind of a campaign reporter and live out of a suitcase, but I really wanted to cover how government functions and government works. A lot of that was being kind of just the nerd who took AP government in high school and really enjoying it and really kind of being interested with how the government works, but also just growing up in Iowa. So I grew up in Iowa, from Iowa City. Obviously, Iowa is the center of the political universe every 4 years. And that was kind of a unique opportunity that I got being going to, not only growing up in Iowa, but also going to college in Iowa and working for my college newspaper at the University of Iowa, the Daily Iowan, that, presidential campaigns took seriously because they wanted to court every vote that they could in Iowa, including college students. I remember I had already graduated by then, but I remember listening to my friends who were still working on their college paper that the Obama campaign in 2008 really courted the Daily Iowan's endorsement. And it was just kind of really interesting to me just how, people who, campaigns of people who eventually become the most powerful person in the world was really wanted the endorsement and the backing and to talk to college students who are just kind of, scrambling to put out a newspaper every day as we juggle classes and, side jobs and also just kind of being a college student and being adults for the first time in our lives. So that was a really great privilege that I had, being able to cover these big politicians who would swing by Iowa or the other areas, other areas surrounding Iowa City. I got to cover the aftermath of the 2004 caucuses when I was a freshman, and still not completely sure how a caucus works, but just being in Des Moines on the night of the caucus results and just being really, awed by seeing like the hundreds of reporters who had come from literally all over the world to witness this moment. So that was just an interest. That was a privilege that I got, and also just kind of what kept fueling my interest in political journalism. But I'm also a strong believer that fundamentals matter fundamentals matter in a lot of things, but especially in journalism. So, which is why the internships that I had at the Des Moines Register, St. Petersburg Times, which is now the Tampa Bay Times, so I'm kind of dating myself here, in Florida, and at other places, and also just kind of my work at the Daily Iowan, which effectively also served as a local newspaper, not just a campus newspaper. Those, covering city council meetings, and also with my first job at the Star Ledger in Newark, New Jersey, right after graduating from undergrad, that really, built the foundation blocks of just fundamental basic reporting, whether it's covering city council meetings, town zoning and board meetings, covering cops, covering trials, learning how different legal systems work in Iowa and New Jersey, dealing with local politicians, not just members of Congress and presidents of the United States, but like the local freeholders in New Jersey or the local state representatives. All that is just really good basic practice that I am really thankful for that I had before I kind of went into covering, political journalism full time. But even when I was in, at my first job, when I was still in New Jersey, even then I could, you could kind of sense that the industry was starting to change. But at the same time, I didn't want my path to Washington. I knew I wanted to make it to Washington someday, but I didn't want my path to Washington to be what I felt was kind of the traditional path for a reporter, which is, work at your local newspaper and go to a bigger newspaper, which may have like a state house bureau. So maybe you'll go cover the governor of the state. And if this newspaper is big enough to have Washington correspondents, maybe then they'll send you to Washington. I didn't want to do that. So I went to graduate school at American University and got a fellowship there to work at USA Today while I was getting my grad degree, and then was lucky enough to get a job at Politico right after I finished my grad degree. Was at Politico for 8.5 wonderful years, and then got my dream job at the Washington Post, and kind of having a front line to all these really historic events, and just having, obviously stressed out a lot. I think the last 4 years have considerably aged a lot of people, including journalists, but also just having a lot of fun while doing it. So I think it's just, that's kind of been my path. And I don't really imagine, government and politics is always interesting, always dynamic, and there's always going to be a need for a healthy, robust Washington press corps to keep, lawmakers and the president of the United States in check. And I think that's, always going to be kind of where my interests lie.
Thank you so much for that response. So it sounds like you've been involved in political journalism for a long time, and you previously covered the Senate and immigration policy before moving on to cover the Trump administration at the Washington Post. How, if at all, has it been different to cover the entirety of an administration's actions as opposed to focusing on a specific issue area?
So I always think that it was really important for me to be given the immigration beat as a beat several years ago, because I think it was it's so important. A lot of reporters covering Congress and especially the White House just have to know everything. I can't even just kind of making the shift from, primarily a congressional reporter at Politico to one who kind of covers the intersection of the White House and Capitol Hill for the Washington Post. Being a White House reporter, you just have to know so much about everything, because the president of the United States and the administration matters on basically every kind of major issue, domestic and foreign. But I think it was really important for me, especially as a relatively younger reporter, to have a specific coverage area like immigration to start off when I was starting my congressional reporting career, because I started covering Congress full time at Politico in 2011, and I kind of started out covering general breaking news and didn't really kind of develop. I was kind of slow in developing sources. I didn't have an area of expertise. And then right after the 2012 election, when President Obama beat Mitt Romney by a staggering amount among Latino and Asian voters, and that was the time when Republicans really had a reckoning and say, we have to make right with, our Latino voters. And one way of doing that is doing immigration reform. Now, clearly that didn't happen, and the party went in a completely different direction in 2016, and that's a debate for another time. But that was when my editors say, all right, well, can I put you on this immigration beat in Congress? You will cover efforts at comprehensive immigration reform until it passes or dies, both in the Senate and the House. And that was a really valuable experience, because not only could I get to know a policy really well, I could also start building, specific sources. I would write stories about immigration, and lawmakers and aides who had read my stories then would follow up with more story tips or more story ideas, or they would tell me, oh, this is something that's interesting that's going on, you should write about it. And you kind of get to know a core group of lawmakers who are very involved in an issue. And that just always helps a reporter. I mean, that's how I got to know John McCain pretty well, because he was so involved in comprehensive immigration reform efforts in 2013. And also, you not only build sourcing and expertise beyond beyond just kind of the spokespeople, but you get to know councils, you get to know chiefs of staff, you get to know legislative directors, and you just kind of build this kind of network that's really helpful for you as a reporter when you're covering a specific issue. And I also just, on a personal level, I just find immigration reform fascinating. It is a humanitarian issue. It is a social issue. It is an economic issue. And it was just it is a complicated issue. And I also am really compelled to, I'm just really compelled to take complicated topics like whether it's immigration reform or something that I just was working on today, the efforts at a filibuster overhaul in Washington. I just really think it's important for journalists to be able to take complicated topics, whether it's on policy or procedure or anything else, on foreign policy particularly, and being able to explain it in a digestible way for readers and viewers. And I think that's such an important part of our work, and also driving home the point to people consuming our work, why this matters and how this would matter for them. And I think building kind of one's, focusing in on one kind of coverage area on immigration really helped with that. And obviously, immigration is one of those issues that's just constantly around. So, I covered it extensively under the Obama administration and kind of the policy fights under that. But then with Trump, it was a huge part of the Trump administration. And aside from just his constant, fascination and fixation with his border wall, but his administration, his staffers, made so many kind of still, as of yet uncovered or inadequately covered changes to the legal immigration system and immigration enforcement that the Biden administration is now having to come to terms with and deal with. So you see, so developing an expertise in a topic like that, you just see how that expertise builds up over administrations, because especially an issue like immigration, it's always going to be an issue, whether it's under the Obama administration, Trump administration, or the Biden administration, or future administrations. So I think that was really important to build a policy expertise on that front.
Thank you so much. So for the sake of time, unfortunately, this will be my last question before I move on to some questions for the audience. So I want to talk about something you just mentioned, which is sources. During the Trump administration, several stories developed from anonymous comments made by members of the administration. How, if at all, do correspondents develop these connections with White House staff members, especially those who may not feel comfortable with speaking publicly otherwise?
So the first and foremost is that you have to establish yourself as a reporter who can be trusted. And that can be done in a lot of ways, or in multiple ways, obviously. Having a body of work that is fair, that is accurate, that not only that tells the truth, but also tells the most comprehensive version of the truth that can be delivered on deadline and reflects as many perspectives as possible, being accurate in that. So not having a lot, and making sure you have very few corrections, and just kind of, building up a reputation as someone that you can talk to. And I think for, sources under, under any circumstance, whether it's a congressional staffer who doesn't want to speak out but feels compelled to talk to a reporter for some reason, or a Trump White House official, or just kind of anyone, you want to kind of, first of all, figure out a way to just say that I'm working on a story. I'm interested in hearing your view, because obviously your view is one of many that we want to make sure gets reflected in a story. We don't have to attach your name to it. We will do whatever we can to make sure this isn't traced back to you, because we know how that could be problematic for people's jobs. But we also try to make it clear that what you have to say is important for the public to hear. It's important for the public to know about just the, a disarray of a White House, because it has a tangible outcome on a policy and what a White House does. So you try to make your case that way, and then hopefully you just kind of, it's sourcing is complicated, but it's something that it just kind of builds up over time. Like you build a confidence through your body of work and just kind of how you conduct yourself in your conversations with people, whether you are a trustworthy reporter or not, that you're a straight shooter, that you are honest about the kind of story that you're pursuing, that you don't blindside people. I have a personal philosophy that, I'm obviously, as part of political coverage, you have to do tough coverage. But and which can be uncomfortable, obviously, for people who you talk to on a regular basis, whether it's senior staff or, lawmakers, or even the president of the United States. But a kind of a philosophy of mine as it relates to tough coverage is that, I will be tough on you, but I will never surprise you. Like if it's going to be a bad or a tough story on you, I will let you know. I will be completely forthright and honest, and I will never, it's the philosophy. It's kind of a gruesome phrase, but a lot of reporter friends and I espouse it, is that we will never stab you from the back. We'll just stab you from the front. And just even talking with a lot of, talking with people who work kind of on the other side, like in political communications or press secretaries or whatnot. If you talk to them, I bet most, if not all, would say it is much worse to be surprised than have to deal with a bad story. And when you're surprised at a bad story, that's when things go wrong. So I think as reporters, it is really incumbent upon us to be as honest as possible too in our reporting process, and just say like, hey, this is what we have found. I mean, this is the information that we are going to present in our story. So what is your response? Work with us, give us answers, so we can reflect the as much as we can the entirety of that truth for our readers and viewers.
Thanks so much for answering all my questions. So we're now going to move on to audience questions, which we've collected over the course of this event. We did receive quite a few, so we'd love to get to as many as possible. So the first question we have, it was asked by Steve and an anonymous audience member. On January 6th, you reported on the insurrection within the Capitol. What do you think this event meant for the state of our politics, and how do journalists like you maintain fair coverage of breaking news? Steve also mentions that he loves your reporting.
Oh, that's very nice. Thank you. January 6th was kind of a tough day for a lot of us. I mean, obviously, it was a horrible day for the nation to know that this place, which is more than anything, any other kind of, more than it's the most kind of tangible symbol of our democracy that I can think of. It's a place where, as long as you go through metal detectors, like you can really demonstrate, even if you're not a reporter, you can demonstrate your First Amendment, you can participate in protests, you can go up to your member of Congress, or you can try to go to your congressman's office and tell them your views. Like it just having that level, that just matters so much for what the United States is and what democracy is. So it was just really kind of terrorizing on multiple levels to see it attacked so badly. So I think I wasn't there at the Capitol that day. It was actually weird. I was supposed to be there around the time that the insurrection would have begun, but like I at the last minute switched shifts with a colleague. So I was actually home when this all happened. But a lot of my closest friends, my best friends were, like especially my friends who still work at Politico, who are among my closest friends, they're there, my Washington Post colleagues are there, the entire congressional press corps is very close and very friendly. I mean, we get to know each other through hours and hours of stakeouts and being on Capitol Hill all the time. So we're all very close, even though we obviously maintain an adversarial relationship with members of Congress and staff. I mean, these are people we talk to every day too. So that affects us. The Capitol Hill is like a community, and also just the police officers that we see every day who protect us, the food staff who, greet us with a smile when we ask them when I always ask for like my grilled cheese sandwich. Like it's just this community. So just to see it attacked was really tough. And I think just because of our, firsthand kind of, closeness to the Capitol and our kind of really intimate understanding of what this place means for our country and democracy, like I think it helped us really best reflect how damaging this insurrection was to what the United States stands for, and for us to reflect that in our stories and why this is such a big deal, and why, for example, there was a lot of this, and you're seeing this now, frankly, like that it is a false equivalence to, like compare what happened on January 6th to some of the other protests last year that may have caused property damage at times and whatnot. Like they're simply just not the same. And so it's just with what happened on January 6th, it was just so important for us to accurately describe just what a breach of just not only security, but also democracy it was for that point. And also just because we are so familiar with just how the Senate works and just how Congress works, it's really important for us to tell the public just how close we were to just utter catastrophe that day. Like if you saw how close the mob got to Vice President Pence and Speaker Pelosi, all these people who are in the presidential lines of succession, that if there wasn't a police officer a random police officer who told Mitt Romney to like go this way because they're coming that way, like he could have, very significantly been, he could have, like, it's just, we came so close to an complete catastrophic disaster. And I think we who know the Capitol, know the layout of the place, and just know how it works can describe that best, if that makes sense.
Thank you. So our second audience question was asked anonymously. During the confirmation hearings for Neera Tanden, your request for comment from Senator Murkowski regarding one of Tanden's tweets resulted in significant online backlash. How, if at all, did the backlash you received impact the way you view your job as a reporter?
I think what it did, because a lot of the disgusting emails that I got in my inbox and some of the Twitter mentions, and I just kind of didn't look at Twitter for a while. A lot of them were, disgusting, racist, sexist, and whatnot, which are awful, but unfortunately, I'm kind of used to it in this job. It's just kind of an unfortunate reality of being a woman, first of all, being a woman in journalism, but also just being being a woman of color in journalism. It's just kind of, you hit this terrible Venn diagram of racism and sexism, and sometimes you just kind of get caught up in the storm, and it's awful. But another element of that really concerned me and really, stressed me out, and was something that I really wanted, my employers and other journalists to make clear, is that we were literally doing what journalists do. And because I got so much criticism, independent of the gross racist and sexist comments, that was accusing me of injecting myself into the story, not being a journalist, being an activist. And I got so many kind of concerning comments saying that I should actually be working. Why am I working to take down Biden's nominee? Like, you should be kind of encouraging, President Biden to succeed, which that was particularly worrisome, because to me, it just underscored such a fundamental misunderstanding of what our job is, that, this is what I had asked Senator Murkowski was, whether you think it was right for senators to make it an issue, make her social media, her past social media practices an issue or not. It was an issue. It was a bipartisan issue that Manchin and Collins had made, and Neera Tanden was at the risk of failing because of that. So it is relevant whether you think it's right for senators to take a position like this or not. And I don't take a position on that because that's not my job. It was relevant for me to ask Senator Murkowski about it because, Neera Tanden had attacked her previously, and she was considered a critical swing vote who had not yet made her mind. And the White House had kind of made pains to point out that she was kind of their remaining hope to save Neera Tanden's nomination. So just kind of asking her about that was completely fair game, and no journalist disagrees with me on that. But a misunderstanding of how that is kind of a basic part of what we do was something that was frankly disheartening. So I was really thankful that the Washington Post, my employer, not only, condemned just online harassment, which I'm really thankful for, but just explained that this was just part of basic journalism practices, and so it was just more, it kind of made me realize just, that there is a lack of news literacy, journalism literacy, and how we do our jobs. So the more transparency that we could have in terms of how reporters do our work and how we maintain objectivity, I think would be helpful. But that was kind of a rude awakening on my part, that people didn't, some of the detractors really had this fundamental misunderstanding of what our jobs are under any administration.
Thank you. So for our last audience question, Alex Arden asks, do you think we would have learned about Governor Cuomo's alleged transgressions sooner had we had a different president who didn't consume as much media bandwidth?
That's really hard to say. I think it's speaking independently of, what is going on with Governor Cuomo. I mean, obviously, a very busy news-making president does, consume a lot of energy, but it wasn't reporters in Washington who broke the Andrew Cuomo story. It was political reporters in New York, whose job always is to cover Governor Cuomo, cover New York politics, cover Albany. They broke the story, not us in Washington, who have been focused on Trump for the last 4 years. I can't speak to what prompted particularly the first woman who kind of opened the door for more women to come forward. I don't know enough about that situation. But obviously that was kind of a very personal decision that she made to talk about it and write about it and to go public with it. And I don't know if you can draw a strong link between Trump not being in office and this coming out. I think that's just too hard to say. But I think at the end of the day, what it does underscore is just how important it is to have a strong, robust press corps in all 50 states and all 50 capitals, and not just Washington, D.C., because journalism in Washington, D.C. and political journalism, we're doing, frankly, like relatively well. In non-pandemic times when we're not social distancing and a lot of people are still working from home, Capitol Hill is a really crowded place. There are a lot of reporters asking a lot of senators questions, working on a multitude of different stories. And, I am always of the view that more reporters, the more outlets covering different parts of how government works and keeping our elected officials accountable, the better. But I know that's not the same situation in state capitals across the country, state house press corps that have been absolutely decimated, which is really worrisome, because that means a lot of government officials have no one watching what they're doing and can get away with a lot of crap if there's no one kind of going after them and kind of writing about what they're doing and making sure that they are kept in check. And we do see how important a strong, state-based press corps is, by the virtue of the stories that have been broken by, the New York politics reporters at the New York Times, the Albany Times Union. So that, I think, the reporting and the revelations of what has been going on, of all of Governor Cuomo's current troubles, underscores, if anything, just what can happen when there is a strong and reliable and robust local press corps, and why that's so important that stay not only in Washington, D.C., but in all 50 states.
So that's all the time we have. Thank you again for answering all of our questions. I'd like to now welcome our president, Aparna Iyer, back for some closing remarks.
Thank you both so much. A huge virtual round of applause to Casey, our moderator for the evening, and to our speaker, Seung Min Kim. We're so incredibly thankful to have had you here tonight. And as a token of our appreciation from the Berkeley Forum, at every single one of our events, our communications team designs a custom poster for the speaker, and this event is no exception. So this was designed for you by William Lee. Yeah, of course. And at this point, we'd just like to ask whether you have any last closing remarks that you'd like to make, any address to the audience.
Nothing aside, thank you so much for having me, and just really encourage everyone watching just to be a robust consumer of news, not just only so I can pay my mortgage, but but also, but just it's really, it's just really critical that everyone, consumes not only just news, but different outlets, different sources of news, making sure those news are making sure the sources are reliable and factual and neutral, and objective. So I just always want, I just hope that the people who are watching this forum tonight are always kind of assessing their sources of information, making sure they're coming from diverse sources, and making sure at the end of the day they're reliable sources as well.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that. And really quickly before we close out, I'd like to recognize the people from the Berkeley Forum's team who worked on this event. They did a really great job of putting it together, so shout out to them. And lastly, to our audience, thank you so much for coming out to the event tonight. You can find our feedback form to submit any thoughts you have about the event or potential speaker suggestions at tinyurl.com/forumfeedbackspring21. If you'd like to keep up with the Berkeley Forum, we ask that you like us on Facebook or visit our website at forum.berkeley.edu. Lastly, if you are willing and able to support us in any way, you can donate to our Venmo linked below. Any amount goes towards helping us put on more events. Thank you all so much for spending your evening at the Berkeley Forum, and we'd love to have you at another event soon.